This is a Commitment 2020 special in partnership with the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, the Granite State Debates.
Military veterans, but political newcomers. Both men vying for the GOP Senate nomination say it's time for a change in Washington. When these Republicans jumped into the primary, talk of impeachment dominated the headlines. A lot has changed since then, but they say the current crises, from COVID-19 to police reform, make it even more important to refocus on the flexibility of smaller government.
I'm running to preserve the American dream.
I think career politicians are the bane of our existence.
I will look out for the people of New Hampshire.
I'm running to return effective leadership to Washington, D.C.
Tonight, the Republican candidates for U.S. Senate.
Good evening and welcome to the second of our Granite State Debates. I'm WMUR Political Director Adam Sexton. Tonight we're joined by two men who come from similar backgrounds. Both grew up in working class families. Corky Mesner served in the military before making his career in law. Don Bolduc started in law enforcement before becoming a highly decorated general in the U.S. Army. WMUR News 9 evaluated all legally qualified candidates and selected those considered most newsworthy according to its objective criteria to participate in this debate. The candidates will get 1 minute to answer questions tonight. 30-second rebuttals will be allowed at the moderator's discretion. Helping with those questions are our panelists, Monica Hernandez, WMUR anchor Monica Hernandez, and WMUR political reporter John DeStaso. And of course, we are all keeping a safe distance here in the studio, and the candidates are keeping a safe distance in their separate rooms at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College. We do want to note, we are recording this debate instead of broadcasting live. To start things off tonight, we have asked each candidate to tell us how they would make New Hampshire a better place. And we begin with Mr. Mesner.
Thanks, Adam, and I want to thank the viewers for watching tonight. New Hampshire is a beautiful state. Granite Staters are independent, hardworking, welcoming, and they are kind and caring. But right now, we are dealing with an economic crisis caused by COVID-19. We must get jobs back. We must help small businesses. I know how to do that. I'm a political outsider. President Trump endorsed me because he knows I can help him get this economy back. Career politicians like Jeanne Shaheen don't have the answers. Liberty and freedom, empowering Granite Staters to bring back the economy is what will make New Hampshire better now.
Thank you, Mr. Mesner. General Bolduc.
Thank you and good evening. Hello to everybody and all the listeners. My name's Don Bolduc, and I consider this a job interview to be your United States Senator. And that is the biggest difference that needs to be made in Washington, D.C. Someone who takes the politics of character, integrity, and selfless service and brings it to Washington, D.C., replaces ineffectiveness and divisiveness and finger-pointing. This is the biggest problem that we have. People are not working together to solve your problems. I will be accountable to you. I will be responsible to you. I will be transparent, and I will build your trust by listening and learning from you. You will be a participant in the process, which is not done now. I will stay true to the Declaration of Independence and our rights and values therein, as well as our Constitution as written. Thank you.
Thank you, General. And we begin tonight with the COVID-19 pandemic and the many questions it raises. John DeStaso has the first question.
Thank you, Adam. Good evening, gentlemen. People in New Hampshire are worried about what might come next. A surge in COVID cases, a job loss, losing their health care, their children's education. How, as a U.S. Senator, can you guide Granite Staters through these times? And let's start with General Bolduc.
Thank you, John. Well, first and foremost, you have to lead. You have to be present. You have to be here. You have to be out there taking the chances that leaders are supposed to take. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to buy down the fear. I believe in personal responsibility. I believe in trusting people. I think that the COVID crisis can be handled that way, and I think we would avoid an economic crisis. We also need to do our jobs in Washington, D.C., and that's pass targeted and temporary legislation. Legislation that's not full of pork and doesn't have a lot of extras in it that increase our debt, that cause more hardship. We need to streamline the systems that we're going to use to get people help. And first and foremost, we got to put millionaires and public servants at the end of the line when it comes for getting help. We got to put the people that needed the most up front.
And Mr. Messner, same question, please.
Yeah, thanks, John. You know, I've been around visiting Granite Staters for the last several weeks, and even today I was visiting a business, and it was uplifting to hear this business owner talk about how she was able to work through the COVID crisis with her business, how the PPP loans helped her, how the Main Street grant helped her. Granite Staters are being innovative, and we in Washington, D.C. must do what needs to be done to provide help to small businesses and people without jobs on a very specific, targeted basis. We need to empower Granite Staters. We need to make sure that individual liberty is protected. You know, we need to make sure that career politicians don't bog down the help that's needed. And that's why me as a political outsider will go there and get things done, and that's why President Trump endorsed me.
Staying with the COVID-19 pandemic, the next question comes from Monica Hernandez.
With all of the information bombarding Granite Staters right now about COVID-19, what specifically do you think is the best source of information? Who should Granite Staters listen to and why? Mr. Messner, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, because the situation with COVID-19 has become so politicized, and it is very, very difficult to assess what information is the best. I think it's very important that we listen to the state information. That local information is most germane to Granite Staters, and it's most germane to the people and the mothers who are worried about their kids going back to school. So I think the first place I would look to is New Hampshire and the people and Governor Sununu. I think they've done a good job of providing information to us. I think also President Trump's administration has done a good job providing information, and we ought to pay attention to what information that they're putting out. The guidelines that Governor Sununu and President Trump have provided have been very helpful to businesses. I've heard that from business owners as I've been out visiting them.
And General Bolduc, same question.
Thank you, Monica, very much. Hey, listen, the best solution to all our problems are bottom-up solutions, whether it's security, whether it's better governance, whether it is public safety. And we needed to start there, and we did not start there. We started at the top, and we allowed media to convolute things, national media to convolute the message. And then we went on for months, and it was confusing. And the biggest message I hear out there, and I heard it today in Exeter at a meet and greet, was, who do we believe? And that's the biggest problem. And you're supposed to be able to believe leaders. And that's where Jeanne Shaheen has made the biggest mistake. She hasn't been a leader. She hasn't worked through the confusion. She hasn't worked through any solution that would give people confidence so that they can go back to work, so that they can get their kids back to school, so that they can do the normal things that we're supposed to do.
Our next question comes from John DeStaso.
Thank you. Right now, the U.S. Senate is still haggling over a stimulus bill that could extend certain unemployment benefits, send direct payments to Americans, and provide money to schools and municipalities. What specific parts of this bill do you support, to General Bolduc first? And knowing there are parts that you might not support, which would you be willing to live with to get a deal done? General?
Well, thank you very much, John, for that question. And I am not sure that another stimulus bill is required. We still have $1 trillion left in the other one that we haven't fulfilled yet. And I think we really need to look at bottom-up solutions. What are the communities saying that they need? And oh, by the way, why does it always have to be the federal government that solves everybody's problems? That's why we're in this mess. That's why we have unlimited government now. That's why we have fiscal irresponsibility. That's why the safety and security of Americans is in the condition that it's in, because people aren't solving their own problems at their own levels because of government overreach. I don't like the whole thing, and I think that Congress has failed us from the beginning of the stimulus packages all the way up. They've left people to get money so that they can stay home and not go to work. That is not a solution. They have increased our deficit and our debt on our way to financial debt crisis. This is all wrong. And we need to empower our communities to solve the problems, not the federal government to come in and solve it for them.
And Mr. Messner, could you please take that same question?
Yeah, thanks for the question, John. You know, I visited many businesses around the state. I've also talked to some executives at hospitals around the state, and it's really interesting. The hospital executives I spoke with said that they're doing okay and that they don't need more government money. Now, I'm sure there's other hospitals that may need more government money. That's why it's important that any additional funds be very targeted to the people, to the businesses, to the first responders, to the communities that may need it. And you know, the career politicians like Jeanne Shaheen, they want to spend $3 trillion, a bunch of it on pork, and run up the debt. And we have to be more responsible than that and find the people and entities that need the help. And to go ahead and get out the $1 trillion left in the existing CARES Act.
Thank you, Mr. Messner. John DeStaso, another question.
Yes, Mr. Messner, after President Trump made a comment about people injecting disinfectants to kill the coronavirus, you had said that he was trying to be, quote, inspirational. Can you explain what you meant by that, please?
Yeah, John, you know, that's not what I said. And as I've learned on this campaign, you know, what one says is not always reported accurately. And I'm starting to understand why President Trump calls it fake news. And that's happened to me a lot. You know, when I was asked the question, you know, I actually did not address that part of the question. And I went on to talk about what President Trump is doing, and I went on to say that sometimes, generally, President Trump talks in aspirational terms, and it wasn't intended to be specifically referring to anything that he said. So, you know, President Trump, he likes talking to the American people. I like talking to Granite Staters. I've been out. I've done almost 400 events in the last year, and I've talked to a lot of Granite Staters, and I've listened to Granite Staters. So I know what's going on, and I know what help they need, and I'll go to Washington, D.C. as a political outsider and provide that help.
And General Bolduc, you've said that we need to open up the country and trust our businesses and trust people to social distance and wash their hands. Yet in various places throughout the country, including recently on college campuses, things have opened up and it has not worked. What should the federal government do right now to slow the spread?
The federal government doesn't need to do anything to slow the spread. It goes to my original point. It must be locally controlled and locally handled. The bottom-up approach, communities, colleges, businesses, hospitals, doing the right thing, personal responsibility, and trusting people. It's non-existent, and that's why we have the problems that we have today. And we need to be better than that. The federal government is not going to solve your problem. It is only going to get in your way, and you want it out of the way. And that's the biggest problem. The federal government is actually not even run by the elected officials most of the time. It's run by the bureaucrats. And every time something's passed, a bureaucrat gets put in charge of executing it. And what happens? It doesn't help the people that it's intended to help. Bottom-up approaches, trust, personal responsibility. I have a son in college at Purdue University. He's doing just fine. Follow the rules, use personal accountability, and be responsible.
Next question comes from Monica Hernandez.
Well, General Bolduc, in March you said COVID-19 probably began as a Chinese biological warfare experiment gone awry. The director of the National Institutes of Health said a scientific study makes it almost certain that COVID-19 came from nature. Do you still believe it was made in a lab? And if so, what evidence have you found?
Sure, I believe it's in a lab, and I have 18 to 21 U.S. intelligence agencies that actually confirm that. It was made by China. It was in a lab. It was either accidentally released, which is the best case. In the worst case, it was intentionally released. China is the problem. It's China's fault this has turned into a pandemic, and the virus has spread across the world. We cannot sympathize with them any longer. We have to draw a hard line on China. They are an existential threat to this country, politically, diplomatically, militarily, informationally. They are doing everything they can to spread across this world and interfere with Americans' safety and security. And we need to be on guard, and we have to hold them responsible for this.
Mr. Messner, do you think COVID-19 was created in a lab? And no matter your answer here, it did originate in China. So do you think the U.S. should take action against that country, and what would that entail?
Yes. This virus came from China. How it got out of China at this point doesn't matter. We must hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for what's happened here. And President Trump will hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for what happened. And we know that President Trump has the strength and leadership to hold them accountable. We need to bring back jobs from overseas, from China. We need to bring back manufacturing jobs to the United States from China. One of the things we've learned in this crisis is the importance of manufacturing goods in the United States, and we need to provide incentives for companies to do that. In my USA plan at corkyforsenate.com, we outline how to do that and how to help small businesses here in New Hampshire and get some of those manufacturing jobs here.
Next question, John DeStaso.
Thank you. Mr. Messner, many people think that life will get back to normal when there is a vaccine. How confident are you that a vaccine will be developed by 2021, and will you trust one that is brought to market that quickly?
Yeah, John, it's not clear exactly when a vaccine will be done. I know there's some talk that maybe it might even be available this year, if not this year, next year. I think it's incumbent upon the government to fully disclose once a vaccine is developed, how it was developed, what testing has been done, what are the implications of that vaccine on individuals, and so there's a clear and transparent disclosure about all the details with respect to that vaccine. I think that's very, very important. Given what we've been through in this crisis, I think any vaccine developed requires the government to provide full transparency to every American before any American decides whether they want that vaccine or not.
And General Bolduc, same question.
Yeah, thank you, John, very much. Well, first of all, vaccines are a very sensitive subject, and I believe where there is risk, there should be choice. And in this case, I don't think we really fully understand the virus itself. And so how are we going to be able to develop a vaccine that we can actually trust? And I do not believe that the current CDC and NIH and any other government medical facility with standards on this is being held to the proper standard for any vaccine. And I think those need to be improved first and foremost. And I do not believe in mandatory vaccinations, and I want to get that point out right here. It's not that I'm an anti-vaxxer, as I've been described, but I am about public safety, and I am about people's rights, and people should have the choice.
And General, just to clarify, will you take the COVID-19 vaccine yourself?
I will not take it at this time, and I'm going to have to be assured that it is safe and it does what it's intended to do without any other side effects before I decide to take it, and before I recommend anyone else take it. I still believe it needs to be an individual choice.
Mr. Messner, how about you? Will you take that vaccine?
Yeah, Adam, you asked me the other day, I think, the same question. Don't know. I think the government needs to disclose fully all information about the vaccine so that every American has the information so they can make an informed choice about whether to take the vaccine or not. I do not believe in mandatory vaccines. I believe people should have the choice. In addition, I believe if people decide not to take the vaccine, that there should be no penalty held against them for not taking the vaccine.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We're going to shake things up here with a little bit of a lightning round. Please keep your answers on this one to 15 seconds or less. And let's start off with Mr. Mesner. Do police unions have too much power?
No, I don't. I don't think they have too much power. I think the politicians need to empower the law enforcement so that they can do their jobs and do their jobs well and provide them proper training. I support the blue.
All right,
and they need...
General Bolduc, how about you? Do you think police unions have too much power?
I support the police. I support any organization that fights for their budget, their contracts, and their benefits, period.
Okay, so following up on that, General, what about teachers' unions? Do they have too much power?
The same thing. I am a teacher, and I believe that there should be standards for teachers. Bad teachers should be fired. Good teachers should continue. Everything should have a standard. And I believe in anyone that supports the budget, anyone who supports benefits, and anyone supports our kids' education.
Thank you, General.
Is good to go.
Mr. Mesner, how about you? Do teachers' unions have too much power?
Yeah, I believe the teachers' unions do have too much power. And I think that there should be incentives for teachers, and I believe in school choice. I believe in charter schools, homeschooling, and vouchers. School choice for people is very important.
Thank you, Mr. Mesner. Next lightning round question here. Should the federal minimum wage be higher? This to you, Mr. Mesner.
Oh, no. Absolutely not. This is a state issue. There should be no federal minimum wage. It is a state issue, and I think the impact of minimum wage on business needs to be considered very carefully before any state increases it.
General Bolduc, how about you? Should the federal minimum wage be higher?
No.
Simple as that. All right, staying with you, General Bolduc, a little bit of a lighter topic here. During the stay-at-home order, did you binge watch any good TV shows?
I binge watched Hogan's Heroes.
What do you like about that one?
I just love the whole idea of it. Colonel Klink and Schultz and the whole cast of characters. It's funny, it's entertaining, and it allowed me to relax.
All right.
And
Mr.
I watched it growing up.
Mr. Mesner, during the stay-at-home order, did you binge watch any good TV shows?
No, I didn't. I was busy studying issues, talking to Granite Staters on the phone, doing Zoom calls, doing telephone town halls. You know, I grew up in a blue-collar family. I work a lot. I'm happiest when I'm working, and that's what I was doing during the stay-at-home order.
Staying with you, Mr. Mesner, and 15 seconds here. As a rule, when do you wear a mask?
First of all, I think we all need to exercise good judgment. You know, I wear a mask when I'm inside, around people. I wear a mask when I'm outside, close to people. I don't wear a mask when I'm outside and you can socially distance. Right. So it just requires good judgment.
Thank you, Mr. Mesner. How about you, General Bolduc? As a rule, when do you wear a mask?
I wear a mask when it's required by the place that I'm in. And I'm respectful of people that are worried. So that's what I do. I just respect others, and I take personal responsibility, and I use my judgment when I wear a mask.
All right, last lightning round question here, starting with General Bolduc. Do you support the Republican National Convention being held at the White House? Absolutely.
I think the White House has been used by many presidents to communicate their message. I don't see that as a problem at all. It is on loan to the president, and I think he used it appropriately, and I think he used it respectfully, and I think that is the president's choice.
All right, and Mr. Mesner, how about you? Do you support the Republican National Convention having been held at the White House?
It was appropriate for the president to give the speech on the last night of the convention from the White House. And I think it was wonderful. President Trump did a wonderful job. It was inspiring. It was uplifting. It was a good thing for America to see that. The bad thing was after people left and they were harassed and attacked on the streets of Washington, D.C. Even some Granite Staters were harassed by Antifa and the people out of control there.
All right, thank you, Mr. Messner. And speaking of social unrest, we're going to get back to the questions. Let's go now to Monica Hernandez.
Well, there has been another police shooting of an African-American man, this time in Wisconsin, again leading to protests and followed by escalating deadly violence in different parts of the country. Why do you think police keep shooting a disproportionate number of black men in America? General Bolduc.
Well, first of all, the statistics don't bear that out at all. So I don't think that that is correct.
General, the statistics actually show, according to Statista.com and an in-depth look by the Washington Post, that black men are shot by police at more than twice the rate of white men.
Well, I think their facts need to be checked, because if you look over time, there isn't a disproportionate rate of police shooting blacks, shooting whites. The police do their job. If the question here is it lawful? Is it necessary to use force? And did they use it consistent with the law? That's what the issue is. It's not about who gets shot. If you're breaking the law and you're using violence, and the police are within the law, within their means to use that force, then that's the question. Everybody is convoluting this. Statistics aside, the police have a job to do. We need to support them. Some police make mistakes. Some police do it wrong. They need to be held accountable by their leadership. We're painting everybody with the same color brush. We can no longer do that. That's what's causing the divisiveness. We have to come together and we have to work together. This is a community problem and we need to fix it.
Mr. Messner.
At the community level.
Yes. If you look at the statistics on a per capita basis, you are correct. If you look at the numbers on a gross basis, there are more white men shot by police. So just to clear that up, you know, I think we need to look at this in context, and the context here is law enforcement has over 300 million interactions a year. 300 million interactions a year, and there are circumstances where law enforcement officers make mistakes. There are circumstances where law enforcement officers do the wrong thing, do the bad thing, but those circumstances are very, very, very small on a percentage basis when you consider the 300 million interactions that law enforcement officers have a year.
And the next question also has to do with race and justice. Do you believe there is systemic racism in America? And regardless of your response here, why do you think there's a fundamental difference in the way Americans answer that question? Mr. Messner.
Yes. I do not believe there's systemic racism in the United States. I think the situation requires everybody to muster the courage to come together and talk about this issue, to talk about all the issues affecting people of color, all the issues affecting our country. I mean, there are issues affecting people of color in the inner city that need to be dealt with. The carnage that goes on in Chicago every weekend with people of color getting shot and shot by other people of color. We need to come together to solve these problems, and the politics around this must stop. We know that career politicians like Jeanne Shaheen use this issue to try to get votes, and we have to stop doing that if we want to solve this problem. But there's not systemic racism. We need to come together. We need to have the courage to have open discussions about this and not have career politicians take advantage of this issue.
General Bolduc.
Thank you very much. I also agree that there is no systemic racism. There's systemic divisiveness. That the systemic divisiveness is a result of politics of power and money and selfless service, and how can I get reelected, and how can I use social situations to my advantage? How can I keep people in bins and secluded and then use divisive messaging to get them to go against each other? This is not systemic racism. It's systemic divisiveness. It is a problem of communication. It is a problem of effective leadership. It is a problem of finger pointing. It is a problem of blaming. It is a problem of not solving problems. And that is the essence of the issue, and that's why I want to go to Washington, D.C. to replace that and to bring effective leadership where we will solve problems and we won't create divisiveness, which leads to violence.
Next question comes from John DeStaso.
Thank you. General Bolduc, as a former police officer, what would you have done if you were there when Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was kneeling on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes?
I would have gone over to him and told him to get off his neck. I was a police officer, and we have to take care of each other. That's what police officers do. We have to look out for each other. Because let me tell you something. When you're in a room and you got 6 people around you and you're about ready to get your butt kicked, right? It gets tense. And you're trying now to survive. You're trying now not to get put in a hospital. And I've been in those situations. And I know that we're around each other to help each other to de-escalate. That's what we do. And that's what should have been done. And it was clear to me. Now, we have a problem because that wasn't done. And now we need leadership to kick in, and we need leadership to take over, and we need to hold people accountable for their actions.
Mr. Mesner, there's a movement to end qualified immunity which shields individual police officers from being sued while doing their jobs. Do you think qualified immunity should be scaled back or scrapped? Does more need to be done to hold police officers accountable?
Yeah, first thing that needs to happen is to help law enforcement throughout the country. Senator Tim Scott in the Senate proposed a reasonable bill to help law enforcement, to give more money for training, to have a system where there's better reporting. And the career politicians in the U.S. Senate, the Democrats, would not even vote to allow that bill to come to debate. It wasn't a vote to approve it or not. It was a vote to debate it. And the career politicians, including Jeanne Shaheen, would not even vote to debate that bill. So I think to help law enforcement to deal with these issues like qualified immunity, we need to get political outsiders like me in the U.S. Senate who can solve these problems and do the right thing, do the harder right instead of the easier wrong, instead of playing political games.
Next question comes from Monica Hernandez.
Well, General Bolduc, the nation's largest LGBT advocacy group says you used a homophobic slur in one of your television ads where you said, quote, "I didn't spend my life defending this country to let a bunch of liberal socialist pansies squander it away." First, do you regret using that word? And second, since a large number of voters say they're looking for bipartisanship in Washington, how does that promote toning down political rhetoric?
Well, first of all, we need men of action in Washington, D.C., not men with a bunch of plans. And certainly we got to stand up to people. And that is a clear message to those that are supporting American socialism. American socialism at the expense of our Constitution and at the expense of our law and order and at the expense of our rights and our Declaration of Independence. Weak people not standing up for America, right? We have anarchy on one side, and we have American socialism on the other. Total control and out of control. And what sits in the middle is our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. And that's what that was meant to call them out. Had nothing to do with anything else except calling people out to stand up for what is right, to stand up for our Constitution, to stand up for the safety and security of Americans. Put Americans first, and I will put Granite Staters first.
General, to be clear, do you regret using that word in your ad that one of the nation's largest LGBT advocacy groups called a homophobic slur?
No, I don't. And to be honest with you, I checked with my friends, same-sex friends. They don't use that word to characterize themselves, and they didn't find it offensive at all. it was used as it was intended. Weak people not standing up for what is right.
Thank you. Mr. Messner, you've been criticized for being a, quote, carpetbagger, accused of using New Hampshire as a way to get elected to the U.S. Senate. You've owned a home in Wolfboro for years, but just registered to vote there in August of 2018. An exploratory committee to start your candidacy was set up in Colorado, and that's where your longtime home was and your business is. Why not run there?
I love New Hampshire. I choose to live here because I love New Hampshire. I will die here. My kids know to put my ashes on the shore of Lake Wentworth. Over the last 10 years, I've helped conserve over 250 acres in my community. I'm engaged in my community. I know all the small business owners. I am one of the 60% of Granite Staters who moved here from somewhere else. And I'm proud to be a Granite Stater. I will always be proud to be a Granite Stater. And I chose to run in New Hampshire because I live here. And I love the values of the Granite State, the live free or die values. And I will fight for those values. I will fight for every Granite Stater. I will fight for individual liberty and economic freedom. I will fight so every Granite Stater and for generations beyond have the opportunity to live the American dream.
Next question, John DeStaso.
Mr. Messner, General Bolduc recently said he's known you for a year but doesn't trust you. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, John, that kind of comment is below the dignity of the voters of New Hampshire. You know, it's important we talk about the issues here. It's important we talk about bringing this economy back, creating jobs, helping small businesses. You know, it's important that we talk about supporting President Trump's agenda. That's why he endorsed me. President Trump endorsed me because he knows I can beat Jeanne Shaheen. He knows I will help him get things done in Washington. He knows as a self-made businessman, I can help him clean out the swamp, and that I will beat Jeanne Shaheen. And that's what we ought to be focused on. We ought to be focused on getting things done for Granite Staters and talking about the issues. And that's what I'm going to do.
And General Bolduc, since you don't trust Mr. Messner, if he happens to become the Republican nominee, would you still vote for him?
I will do my utmost to support the Republican Party and the Republican ticket. You're asking me a hypothetical that I don't think will come true. I believe that I will win the primary, so it's kind of a moot point in my mind. But bottom line is that I will support the Republican Party and I will support the ticket. And he's going to have to earn my vote, just like he's going to have to earn every other New Hampshire Granite Stater's vote.
All right, next question, Monica Hernandez.
Mr. Messner, you have been open about the struggle your father faced with prescription painkillers. Can you share how that has shaped your ideas for handling the opioid epidemic?
Yes, it was a difficult thing, and you know, it was prescription drugs. There's much more to the story, but I think we need to provide prevention, treatment, recovery for everybody. I think that our medical community needs to do a better job before they prescribe these opioids. In fact, I'll tell you a story. I have two sons that are West Pointers, and my youngest son last year had a shoulder operation, and he had it at West Point, and I went there and to be with him, and I said to him, I said, Thomas, only take Advil after the operation. Don't take any opioids. Advil is good enough. You can get through it taking Advil.
Thank you. And General Bolduc, do you believe those convicted of drug offenses belong behind bars? And what additional tools should law enforcement have at their disposal to combat the opioid epidemic here in New Hampshire?
Well, first of all, I think there should be better support services So those that the police and the fire and our emergency medical services personnel are showing up to give Narcan to over and over and over again can go to a place where they can actually get enrolled in a program that leads to recovery. That's a big problem that we have. I mean, Rhode Island has a great system. Connecticut has a great. There's a lot of great templates out there for people. Throwing someone in jail who is addicted to drugs without any treatment is not the solution. We are better than that. This is 2020. We have to support people that are on drug addictions, and we have to understand their story. There's a story to all of these. There's veterans. There's people that were addicted because of doctors' carelessness, and so we need to understand the problem better, and we need to do better in recovery and preventive practices, not just intervention.
Next question, John DeStaso.
Thank you. General Bolduc, more than 100,000 veterans live in New Hampshire, the 5th largest vets population per capita in the United States. More than 100 are homeless on any given night in the state and more than 40,000 nationally. The CARES Act provided billions for veteran services, including for homeless vets, but advocates say they need an additional $500 million to $1 billion more to help. As a veteran, would you support additional hundreds of millions of dollars for homeless veterans? And more generally, please list the priority services for vets that you support. General.
So I get my medical care from the Veterans Administration here in Manchester. I am a 100% disabled veteran, and that's where I get my care. And I'll keep that care when I go to Congress until we fix the healthcare system for our veterans and everybody else. So the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. is broken and it needs to be fixed. But more importantly, we need to get the VA out of the primary health care system because they can't manage it properly. And we need to privatize all of that for our veterans. And that will increase the care, it will decrease wait times, and it will get at the root causes of the extremely high suicide rate. From 2008 to 2018, the entire time Jeanne Shaheen has been a senator, we've lost over 60,000 veterans. I've been working as a veterans advocate for 34 months in New Hampshire, across New England, and across the country. I'm a national spokesman. I will go to Washington, D.C. and make the right changes to help our veterans and their families.
And Mr. Mesner, also a veteran, how do you respond to that?
Yes, first of all, I think more choice for veterans is really, really important. I don't think we should privatize the entire VA medical system, but I do think veterans should have more choice. Many veterans that I spoke with around the state like getting their medical care from the VA system. Well, they do. So I think that's first thing. Secondly, I visited some very, very good non-government organizations that help homeless veterans. The Bridge House up in Plymouth, they do a wonderful job. It's entirely self-funded. I was over the Liberty House last week, and I found out from them that they can't get any federal dollars to help them. So the bureaucracy is making it too difficult to help these non-government organizations who are helping veterans, and we need to cut through the red tape. As a political outsider, I will get that done. I'm a veteran. I have 2 sons serving, and I will get it done for the veterans.
General Bolduc, you're having a bit of a reaction there. What's your reaction?
Yeah, my reaction is that I don't know how he can actually understand what a veteran goes through at the Veteran Administration when he doesn't get his health care there. I've had 4 health providers in 34 months, 4 primary care providers. I have helped literally 50 to 60 veterans because they can't get help there. I can't get an appointment on time, on scheduled time. My yearly appointment was supposed to be in May, but I can't get it until November. This is the problem. We got people that think they understand what the issue is, and then they have circular arguments or circular concerns for it. And God bless America, we need to help our veterans, and we need better solutions than what I just heard.
Mr. Mesner, you get a little extra time to respond there. What's your response?
Sure. I talk to veterans. I talk to veterans in New Hampshire. I have heard from veterans, from their mouth, that they like the care they get at the VA. I've also heard from veterans that they like choice. I've heard from veterans that they don't like the care that they get from the VA. What I'm saying is provide more choice for those who don't like the care, and those who like it can continue to get the care there. It doesn't have to be one or the other. What I've heard from veterans many, many times is there are some veterans who like the care that they receive at the VA, and quite frankly would not be for privatizing it. Others want more choice and want to go to the private sector. We can do both.
Thank you, Mr. Messner. Next question, Monica Hernandez.
President Trump has ordered the Pentagon to move 12,000 troops out of Germany. The defense secretary originally said it was strategic, but then President Trump said it was because Germany is not paying enough towards funding NATO. This move will cost America billions of dollars to complete. Do you think this is a good idea? Will it make America safer, and is it worth the money? Mr. Messner.
Yeah, that for me hits at home. My son, Second Lieutenant Max Messner, is at the infantry school in Fort Benning, and after which he will go to Ranger School, and he is scheduled to be deployed to Germany. And I think what the president has done is, based on what I have read, is some of those troops are going to be deployed to, I believe, Poland. And then I think the remainder of those troops will be rotated back to the United States. I think it's really, really important that member countries of NATO pay their fair share. And President Trump has done a good job requiring them to pay their fair share. In fact, the Secretary General of NATO is very supportive of President Trump's approach to NATO. And the countries need to start paying up. We shouldn't be paying the bills for everybody. They need to pay their fair share.
General, your thoughts?
So I have personal experience working with NATO, 10 tours in Afghanistan and in the African continent for 4 years. I believe in our alliances, but I also believe that everybody should pay their fair share, just like the president does. I mean, that's a no-brainer, that's a given, and it's something that administrations before President Trump haven't focused on. But I do not believe in returning any force structure from Europe back home to the United States. Repositioning is one thing, but keeping the forces that we have there, we've reduced from 300,000 down to the number that we have today. And that number that we have today does a variety of things, not only in Europe, but in Africa. And we need that flexibility, and we need that structure in place so that if something happens, we have something to fall in on. I've studied this, I've worked with it, I've lived it. I know exactly, the footprint that we need. We have it just about right. Repositioning is one thing, returning is completely different.
Next question comes from John DeStaso.
Turning now to health care. General Bolduc, when it comes to health care, you have said it's time for a new health management model for Americans instead of disease management. That would include rewards for healthy behavior. Can you explain how that would work?
Sure. I think that we got it all wrong, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not an anti-medicine guy. Medicine has its role, prescriptions have its role. We just need to be responsible with it, and that's both on the doctor's side and the individual side. But I do believe that we have come wholly dependent on a disease management model that is focused on big pharma and big money and big medical money, and it's increased the prices of everything. I believe that if we go to a healthcare model and we start teaching our children to be healthy from day one, and we do it in our schools, and we do it in our communities, and we do it everywhere else, and we have it like auto insurance, like choice. My 30-year-old son doesn't need the same insurance as an 80-year-old, right? And they can make their choices, and it can be flexible. These kind of ideas will save us money. Getting the federal government out of health care is the best thing that we can do, and that includes veteran care. You can't have it both ways. It becomes way too expensive, it becomes inefficient, and it becomes run by bureaucrats. It just doesn't work. We have it both ways now, and it's not working. So we can't conceivably do that and continue to do that. But a healthcare model based on health management is what I've been talking to about people who run hospitals here in this state.
That's time, General.
And Mr. Mesner, you've said that small businesses and families can't afford health care costs today. Can you explain your proposal for a free market system and how people with pre-existing conditions would be protected?
Yes. First of all, in all circumstances, people with pre-existing conditions should be able to buy health insurance and should have access to health care. So I want to make that clear. There are many things we can do to improve the quality of health care, improve the accessibility of health care, and reduce the cost of health care. One is transparency in the system, allowing people to see what this stuff costs and make informed decisions. That's very important. In fact, when I was speaking with the hospital executives, that was one of their top recommendations, to reduce the cost of health care. Secondly, tort reform. We must stop the frivolous lawsuits against the medical community. Thirdly, reduce the cost of prescription drugs. President Trump has made a huge step to do that with the executive order he signed. Thirdly, allow self-insurance across state lines, increase the competition in the insurance market, and allow market forces to work here.
Thank you, Mr. Mesner. Final question from John DeStaso, and this is going to be quick answers, 30 seconds each.
And Mr. Mesner, COVID-19 has dominated the political landscape and media landscape. There are other issues. Dennis, one of our viewers, said he wants to see all the corruption taken out of Washington. President Trump ran on, quote, draining the swamp of corruption. How do you think he's done to fight corruption? And what additionally would you do or do differently?
Yeah, I think President Trump has done a good job starting to drain the swamp. And I am proud to have received President Trump's endorsement. And I will help him as the next U.S. Senator from New Hampshire to drain the swamp. And in fact, a big step to doing that is for me to get elected as a U.S. Senator and retiring Jeanne Shaheen. You know, career politicians like Jeanne Shaheen create the problem in the swamp.
Mr. Mesner, that's
and we don't need to reelect people like that.
Thank you, Mr. Mesner.
And General, how do you feel about that?
Well, I feel that they elected the president for the same reasons that I am going to get elected. He wasn't part of the swamp. He's not part of the establishment. He's not part of the special interests. He's not part of the lobbyists. He wasn't supported by the establishment. He wouldn't be president today if the establishment were to pick him. He wouldn't be president today if we didn't have an electoral college. So I'll go down there and I will represent America because I'm just like President Trump. I didn't get his endorsement, but that doesn't mean
Thank you.
I'm not going to serve well.
Thank you, General. We appreciate it. Final question here before the candidates make their closing statements. There's so much animosity in the country right now, and it seems like instead of people having differences of opinion, there's just a lot of hatred everywhere. How does America unite, and how can you help heal the divide? General Bolduc?
Well, it's a simple process. It's going down there with the idea that public service is first, and that you're going to serve others, and that you put others before yourself. That is not being done now, and if we continue on this road, we will never ever turn the corner on bringing people together. It's a narrative from men of action. Not a bunch of plans, but men of action who are going to go down there and do the right thing consistent with character, integrity, personal responsibility, and selfless service, and that have proven that in their life, a lifetime of service, and don't come with a bunch of baggage. And I mean a bunch of baggage that the Democrats are going to have a field day with.
General.
That's going to put people in the kung fu stance.
General,
I don't have that.
All right, Mr. Mesner, how do you
Thank
help heal the partisan divide?
Yeah, I think it takes courage, character, leadership, and I've demonstrated that with all the attacks that have been leveled against me from all directions, from the Democrats, from other people. I've been attacked in every direction. And what have I done? I've stayed on the high ground. I showed leadership. I showed courage. I focused on Granite Staters. I focused on the issues that Granite Staters are concerned about. So to get through and bring people together, you've got to have courage and character to be able to withstand the heat, all right, to do the right thing, to do the harder right instead of the easier wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Messner. We've given each candidate 60 seconds for a closing statement. Mr. Messner, you can go first.
Thank you, Adam. And I want to thank everyone for watching tonight. And I would be honored to earn your vote on September 8th. I grew up in a blue-collar family. I went to West Point, graduated from West Point. I'm a veteran. I served in the Army. I have 2 sons that are West Pointers. I have a wonderful daughter. I had a successful business career. I built a business from scratch. I'm self-made. President Trump endorsed me because he knows I can help him get the job done in Washington, D.C. Individual liberty, economic freedom. We must not send back career politicians to the swamp. We must elect political outsiders like me who know how to get things done, who knows how to create jobs, who knows how to help small businesses. I have a lot of business experience.
Thank you,
I will empower Granite Staters to get this economy back. Thank you.
General Bolduc, your closing statement.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, John. Thank you, Monica, for the great questions. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all the viewers. Thank you to Corky Messner as well. I will serve New Hampshire as New Hampshire's native son. I've been a resident here for 58 years, and I'm 58 years old. I've been a Republican since I was 18 years old. I have learned values and ethics working on my family farm in Guilford my entire life, and I've taken those with me every place that I have gone. I love this state. I love this country. I want to earn your vote. I want to earn your vote because I want to go down there and replace the politics of power and money and selfless service with the politics of character and integrity and selfless service. It has been an honor to be on the campaign trail. It has been an honor to meet the people of the Granite State, and it has been an honor to see the state in a different way than I've never seen it before.
Thank you for your time. Thank you to the candidates. We do want to thank the candidates for their time, and the panelists for being part of this debate. And of course, we want to thank you for joining these Granite State debates. Tomorrow, we're going to hear from the Republicans running in New Hampshire's 1st Congressional District. Thanks for watching tonight.